Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to make a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. All right, welcome back, Aspire Leaders, for another wonderful and fantastic guest, as I have the pleasure of having Tim Grivois with me as he's out in Arizona, killing it as a consultant. He's a speaker, and he's working with so many different districts throughout this country. And with that, Tim, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, we've got a lot in common. I can't wait to dive into a lot of different leadership topics for so many wonderful educators out there. October is a tough time with student behavior. I know we're going to kick things off with that topic. But before we do that, Tim, will you just share a little bit about yourself, your educational and leadership background?
Absolutely. I became a teacher in 2003. I was earning a master's degree at Loyola University, Chicago. And just as a first-year teacher, it just was amazing how many committees everybody wanted a new teacher to be on. So just from the very beginning, just having a chance to do everything from the social committee to the science committee to just everything, because I just didn't really know how it works, that the same person kind of ends up in the same room at the same time for all of these things. And I just had this awesome opportunity to collaborate with just some other amazing folks and just discover that, wow, your classroom could be as big as the whole school. Like, we really could do some really neat things if we had a chance to really think of your classroom as being that whole school. So honestly, pretty early on, I enrolled in a doctoral program at Loyola University, so after having been a teacher for about 8 years. So really not that long as a teacher. But I didn't really think that, the minute I started this doctorate program, I was going to immediately be an assistant principal. But then I had a chance that there was an assistant principalship opening in a district that I happened to be doing my student teaching in, years back. So I applied for that. And it just was an amazing opportunity just to get to know, wow, being a teacher and being an assistant principal are completely different roles, but they're also completely the same in so many respects. And just to have that experience of seeing just how a classroom can really be a whole school was amazing. And so since then, I've been an assistant principal, I've been a principal, I've been a central office district leader as well. And now I'm the executive director of TGS Educational Consulting, which is a fancy way of saying I get the honor of walking side by side with teachers and to deliver some outstanding professional learning experiences for them.
Oh, that's amazing. I want to talk about that assistant principal position specifically, because I know a lot of folks over the years I've coached and also have had on as guests are always surprised in that role, specifically with student behavior. And I know for you, the both of us have something in common, which is like really looking at the problem solving component versus just focusing purely on the punishment. So was there any aha moments for you going through that as a new assistant principal?
So one of the things I just feel really lucky about is I present on creating inclusive classrooms for kids with ADHD all the time. It's because I'm an adult with ADHD who is an undiagnosed child with ADHD. But one of the things that I discovered even as a young teacher was that all of the kids with ADHD seemed to end up in my classroom. And that seemed to be, for whatever reason, just kids that had some behavior challenges, that the better I got at my job, the harder it got somehow. And so I really had that just fortunate experience. And then also just like in all the committees that everybody kept asking me to do all the time as a teacher, just the PBIS committee, the behavior team, those were things that, I often found myself on. So I was really lucky because from an early stage as an educator, I was just surrounded by amazing, smart, caring professionals that also had a very caring, compassionate lens towards behavior and really saw behavior not really as the problem we needed to be solving, but as the child's solution to the problems that they were experiencing. And that helps me very early on in my career have a different kind of lens to look at this. But the other thing is, I honestly think most teachers kind of do have a problem-solving lens. It's just that in the moment, the more reactive, I want a consequence kind of thing comes out. And, as is pretty common in the assistant principal role, a lot of that gets delegated to you, PBIS work or behavior intervention work or going to the IEP meetings. A lot of that is something that assistant principals might find themselves getting really good at because they just kind of need to. And, the other aspect of being an assistant principal is, right, your job is to kind of look around and notice what's not getting done and then do that thing is kind of what it is. And a lot of times it really was that a student has flipped a desk or, some unbelievably not okay words have been said. And we need a way to manage that immediate crisis. My first year as an assistant principal, I thought my job was putting out fires, and I got pretty good at it. And I loved being able to show up for teachers when they needed me and to help them and to help students when they needed me as well. But I discovered how it's kind of exhausting, It really is just exhausting to go about things that way. And just as a team, we started to think about, well, why are some of these things? What are these unmet needs? And, which of them really are out of our control and which of them are kind of reasonable if we think about it? And what can we do to better support students?
So you brought up ADHD, and I'm so glad you did, because if you look at, and there's a lot of studies on this, you probably know this, but like John Hattie has specifically had, things that we have within our control and don't have in our control as far as learning and the affect of that. And ADHD was far below everything as far as a negative, and how our school system really is not equipped for students where their brain functions that way. And so, Tim, obviously you lived it, but as a teacher, educator, and now consultant, what are you doing to help educators help that inclusion component with ADHD?
I'm so glad that you brought up Hattie's work in that, because it's one of those things that we as educators, we're living this data out loud. We're absolutely living this data out loud. When we've got students who have behaviors that are exceptionally impulsive, that are just that we just see them just very easily distracted. Now, I always say when we're working with kids with ADHD, yes, they can be very easily distracted, but it's also very easy to get their attention. But when it comes down to it, when we think about where I like to work with schools and districts in this, we want to start with the folks that are leading the schools and leading the classrooms first. That what are some intentions that we can set ahead of time? And so a lot of times what I'll do in these sessions is we'll start with, if I could just ask everybody to do a thought experiment with me. If we were to say that everyone in this room who wears glasses should just take their glasses off for a moment, because you don't really need glasses, your eyes just need to focus more. That's absolutely absurd advice, right?
Yes.
And when we think about our kids with ADHD, saying, you know what, kids with ADHD, you just really need to sit still and focus more. That is exceptionally unhelpful advice to give to a child with ADHD, because we have a diagnosed reason why that is never, ever, ever going to happen. And they are never going to care about staying in their seat the way that we want them to, or at least the way a neurotypical teacher, or who maybe hasn't had a chance to step into this space as much, might want a student with ADHD to do that. And so really starting from realizing that the symptoms of ADHD are things that are not really symptoms of anything. They're just simply character traits of many of our students. And yes, those can be very problematic in classrooms that are designed for neurotypical students. But if we start to look at those symptoms of ADHD, not as daily catastrophes we need to get solved, but daily things that we need to get our arms around, we can start adopting a bit more of a curious perspective than a critical one. And it just tends to coach us into a better problem-solving frame of mind.
Yeah, I love that metaphor. I think that's great that you provide that not only with your coaching, but with the presentations in regards to seeing what that looks like. Because a lot of folks don't relate. And so they don't know how that looks as far as that person's brain. And that's a great way to let them understand how that is for that child. So I want to talk about something else that you brought up earlier, Tim, which was the PBIS component. I know that you're a big believer in that, but you also have something that you speak on often and help folks with, which is that check-in, check-out strategy. Mm-hmm. And I know that can look a lot of different ways for different folks. And maybe someone already has like a preconceived idea of what that term means. But for yourself, how do you use the check-in, check-out to be effective?
Yeah, and I would just like to go back just a little bit. So just in terms of calling myself a believer of PBIS, what I would say is that I have worked within PBIS frameworks for all of my career. And in terms of helping schools and districts implement them, I certainly have done that for a very, very long time. What I would also say is that I've come to view myself a bit more as a critical friend of PBIS. When we think about PBIS, it's about 60 years old. And when we think about our own growth in the field of education, what our craft looked like 60 years ago is very different than what it looks like today. And so there's a lot of areas where I would encourage schools implementing a PBIS framework to consider whether these practices make sense now and whether it's an opportunity for us to grow. And so specifically within check and check out, it's a very common behavioral intervention that schools implementing PBIS would do. And it's often called like a tier 2 intervention on the, color-coded triangle of doom. I don't talk a lot about color-coded triangles because I don't care if something is a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I just care that a student needs something and we have a way to deliver it. So if it helps somebody to organize it in a color-coded triangle, okay, fine. But I don't think that we need to do that. But particularly within check in, check out, such a simple intervention, right? The idea is that we have a student who needs some extra support to be their best. They're seeking adult connection one way or the other. And so we may as well front load the love, rather than continue to deal with the connection seeking behavior in ways that we're not ready to support. So we assign the student a check in, check out coach. Like that loving, caring adult is going to meet with that youth in the morning. We're going to set them up for a great day. The teacher is going to provide some positive, value-centered, brief feedback throughout the day. Then the child meets with them at the end of the day. What also often happens is that this child is expected to carry with them a daily point card where teachers circle numbers and rate their behavior across whatever their values are. Usually it's respectful, responsible, safe at most PBIS schools, and I don't know why, but that seems to be what they've adopted for some reason. And I just would like for our listeners, if you're implementing check in, check out, to consider what it might be like for you as an adult to have your principal rate you hourly on the hour and assess your performance across your school values by circling zeros, ones, and twos on a piece of paper, and what that might feel like. And particularly at middle and high school, I just don't know any teenager that's really looking forward to a conversation like that, right? So what I always encourage schools to do is really consider the intervention has never, ever, ever been found on that form, right? The intervention has always been found in the conversations that we have with kids. And so if that really is what the intervention is about, what might happen if we just, stop doing the thing that didn't really matter?
I think you bring up some really good critical points there, Tim, for folks to start assessing and reflecting on what practices they have on their campus. I think I'd also like them to reflect on engaging an effective PD for staff. Yeah. I know as a leader, that's something that you had within your role as far as providing that to your teachers, but then obviously you do that now. So any words of wisdom for those who need to share a little bit of information to a staff?
So that was one of the things too that I was surprised to discover that I liked so much. That right away as an assistant principal, like I think I shared earlier, that a lot of times as an AP, your job is to look around and see what's not getting done and then do it. And I just want to say I had a great principal. And so if you ever find out who I'm talking about here, just know that this person is great. I'm not describing anything wrong about this person at all. But a lot of times it would be, like PD would be on a Wednesday. I would realize on the calendar Monday was here and we hadn't really figured it out. And so I just did it. And I discovered in that process how much I really liked it. But also in that discovering too, that there's so many ways where it should be so obvious that adult learners are not elementary school students or high school students or middle school students. Adult learners are not that at all. And so often it just seems like the PD that most districts designed, and just with all respect to all the amazing people that are doing this, somehow it just seems like it's designed on purpose for disengagement. I don't understand why that is, but it just seems like we're all marched into the same high school cafeteria with hard metal chairs. We're looking at the same slides. We've heard them last year. We don't really understand why we're here, but we're going to be told what we need to do at the end. And by the way, there may or may not be anybody showing up in between sessions to help us out once we leave this time necessarily. And so, there's a lot of things that we could think about. We can think about like autonomy. We can think about emotional connection. We can think about relevance. But I think right now, if I would ask, leaders to start anywhere, it really would be autonomy. So for example, I recently did a workshop on supporting kids with ADHD and working memory, because all of the visible symptoms of ADHD tend to get most of our attention. But the reason why Hattie's got ADHD where it is probably a working memory issue, and the research is starting to support that more and more. So we had one session where I just did more of a sit and get, where I explained what working memory was, how ADHD it tends to affect working memory. But that next one was so much different, where we had 4 different stations with 4 different strategies that teachers could use. One was retrieval practice, another was flashcards, another was chunking, another one was visual task cards and schedules. They're all evidence-based, classroom possible strategies that we can use. But I didn't necessarily need everyone to march through all 4. There was no expectation. It was all an invitation. Have some autonomy, choose the space that seems to be serving you. I'll be here to help. If you need it, probably you won't, because all the materials you need are going to be there. My main job was to literally set the table so folks could do what they wanted to do, and make sure there was enough laminating sheets available for folks that wanted to make visual task cards. And so that autonomy piece is one that I really would want leaders to think about first. And it's so much easier to do than we think. And I think a lot of times, district leaders that are planning PD think that giving teachers autonomy is going to create a lot of problems. It really isn't. It ends up like working with those constraints a little bit because it offers people some voice and some choice and seeking out the kind of learning that's actually going to get implemented in their classrooms, which of course is what we should all want as leaders.
I'm so glad you talked about working memory. That's amazing. I'd like to go deeper in that, but we might need to have you back for that one, Tim.
Absolutely. It'd be an honor.
I know you got some free webinars coming up, and I've been flashing your website. And so we just share out what folks can expect from these webinars, topics, some of the things that you'll be providing, maybe some resources to. And then, of course, for those who are on YouTube, you can see it visually, but if you wouldn't mind directing them where to go to sign up for the free webinars.
Oh, absolutely. So the free webinars are going to be on the website at www.tgseducationalconsulting.com. And the main areas where those webinars are going to be focused will be on just different aspects of implementing positive behavior intervention and support, creating inclusive classrooms for students with ADHD, and then from burnout to balance, a whole series on compassion, fatigue, and wellness, but not the kind of wellness that's going to make a teacher roll their eyes, because we've talked to teachers about self-care in ways that, in my view, are honestly rather dismissive, but in ways that are going to be just supportive and coming from just us from the own inside out, and we'll have space for that together. But the good news is that the free webinars, but I honestly don't care if you show up or not, because I'm going to record the sessions and make sure you have access to them. So if a Thursday afternoon webinar isn't something that you feel like doing, I completely understand. You should be at home with your family. I'll send you the video and you'll have access to all the handouts and content just the same. But I'm always delighted to see new names pop up on the screen and get to build community in that way.
So cool. So I'll make sure that the website's in the show notes for everyone. So make sure you click it on that. And then once it's available, make sure that you're signing up for that, not only to see it live, but of course, if you want those resources and things later on, it sounds like the replays will be sent to you. So that's awesome, Tim. So glad that you have that set up. Let's talk about the ways that you're helping school districts. And then, of course, I know you speak a lot too. So if someone is interested in some of the topics that we've talked about today, what are they going to receive when you are partnering with them?
So one of the best things is that I absolutely couldn't tell them what they're going to receive right now until we've had that chance to have that conversation, and we're going to build something for you. If you're looking for an off-the-rack solution, I'm definitely not the person to talk to. We can go to just other providers that have some very carefully designed products that will help you achieve those kinds of things. But if you've got a problem and you want something solved in a way that feels like you, smells like you, represents the learners that you've got in your district, then we're going to work on that together. So including something like PBIS, which you would think would have a very clear kind of playbook for how to do. Yeah, I mean, I could do that if that's what you want. But what we're really going to do is I'm going to get to know you first, and we're going to develop a very tailored solution. But specifically, the reasons why most schools and districts are going to call me in the first place is usually around positive behavior intervention support, self-care and wellness, and addressing compassion fatigue, creating inclusive classrooms for students with ADHD, and now more and more, honestly, creating inclusive classrooms for students with anxiety as well.
Tim, you talked about compassion fatigue. I'd love to sneak this in as our conversation's winding down. So I know this topic has come up, and that's why I'm kind of intrigued a couple of times with different people, and not even on this podcast, just in conversation. What are you finding specifically with this topic, and how are you helping educators with that fatigue?
What I'm finding is how obvious it is to all of us that compassion fatigue matters, and that it matters in terms of our own student safety and well-being. And what I'm also finding is just how shocking the disconnect is between district leadership and classroom teachers, and what needs to happen to address compassion fatigue systemically. And what I would say is the most important thing to consider is that if we have the honor and the privilege of being in a leadership position, then we also have a responsibility to consider how every single email we write creates work for somebody else. And from the very beginning of that, and those very small kinds of things, can we think about whether or not I actually need to increase a classroom teacher's workload today by sending this memo out? And if the answer is no, perhaps today's a good day to let this one go. I would say also that a lot of times folks in leadership positions too are very concerned about self-care and wellness for their staff. And often it's really hard to direct a lot of that care and kindness back. And so often that tends to be a bit of a coaching piece, or quite a bit of a coaching piece as well when we work on these kinds of things. So folks might hire me to do a session on self-care or the 8 dimensions of wellness or some other aspect of this, but really becomes a lot more intense fellowship around what that means for us individually and systemically.
Yeah, such an important topic. All right, Tim, I asked this question of all my guests, and I'd love to get your input on this. So I love actionable steps. Obviously, it's great that they're hearing all the wisdom that you're providing in this conversation, but we want them to go and do something after this episode. So if there's one thing that our aspiring or current leaders can do to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
Oh my goodness. And this is probably going to be one of the hardest things to do. But what I would say is that an aspiring leader or current leader needs to do right now is to learn to serve themselves as diligently as they serve their school community. And what I mean by that is to remember that all of the care and kindness and support that you are offering everybody else, you are also worthy of. And the best person to provide that is going to be the person who knows yourself the best. And that's going to be our own selves.
Yeah, I love that. Hopefully folks are listening, as this is a good time of year to start tapping back into that. Obviously, summertime is easy, but once we get in the grind of things, it's sometimes hard to remember those practices that helped us and served us well over those times of rest and relaxation over the summer. So let's talk about ways people can connect with you on social media. Obviously, we've talked about your website, but I'd love for folks to check out all the wonderful work that you're doing.
Yeah, there's a lot of great information on the website. So definitely www.tgseducationalconsulting.com is great. But also Instagram is the platform where I tend to be most active. And what's great there is that I make all my videos downloadable. And so if it's something that makes sense for you to use in your own PDs, you're welcome to do that. And I talk about all of these things in bite-sized little nuggets there. And so you can find me on Instagram at TGS Educational Consulting.
Awesome. Well, you're doing a ton of great work. I love the topics that we discussed today. And for anyone that's listening, make sure you're going to the website, grabbing those free resources, connecting with Tim, and of course, getting him to your campus, to your district to help out. I think all of these things are very needed. I mean, obviously there's research out there, but Tim, I feel like there's just scratched the surface of some of these things that are obvious to a lot of folks. They know that it needs to be worked on. However, it's getting passed by. And I think your voice is huge in this. Can't wait to see the work that you're doing in years to come. And I'm so appreciative of your time today and being on Inspire to Lead.
Hey, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's truly an honor to be here.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.